Thank you all so much for being here this morning. I don't know if you've heard this yet, but the governor announced early this morning that he's going to extend the session to July. Have you heard that? April Fools. Had to start with something fun. That would make all of us more afraid than you are. So Senator Richard Briggs, he's the second vice chair of the Senate State and Local Government Committee, and it serves on Senate Health and Welfare as well. Senator Becky Duncan Massey is the chair of the Senate Calendar Committee and a member of Senate Health and Welfare and Transportation and Safety. And then Representative Jason Zachary, who's serving in his first term, is a member of the House Business and Utilities and House Transportation Committee. So welcome all of you, and thank you again for being here this morning. This is, as Alan said, it's our third and final legislative briefing, and so we're anxious to get through with the session and see what great things you have done for all of us in the business community. I think let's start with the budget. You're in the middle of hearings now. I was down this past week, ran into three of our commissioners actually, John and Dave Wright. Where are y'all? You're here somewhere, right there, and got to visit with all of them. And by the way, if you're an elected official, raise your hand so we can say thank you. We've got some city council and county commissioners here, and appreciate you all coming as we always do.
Ed shouts too.
Ed, right? Ed. Ran into three of our commissioners who were down there, I think, talking about de-annexation, but we got them over to see old Betsy from the historical East Tennessee History Museum. We'd taken that down to, we're trying to get some money. I'll just admit it up front. So we took a toy, the original, Davy Crockett's original rifle, and ran into them, got them to come over and visit with us and have their pictures made. And so it was kind of a fun day. But the budget hearings are going on. I sat through some of those, and it appears to me there's a whole lot of people asking for a whole lot of stuff. About $1 billion worth, I think, and there's not much to go around when you cut down to get to the bottom line. So talk about that a little bit. What's happening with the budget? I know the governor has come back with the supplemental amendments and added some things in. So Rick, tell us about what you're hearing, what you think's going to pass, and let's start with the budget.
Well, we'll start with the budget. There's some things that's easier this year than others, and there's some of that's more difficult. I've heard people say when you have budget surpluses that it's a more difficult year than when you don't have any money, because it's easier to say no rather than trying to decide what you're going to do with the excess funds. And as Susan mentioned, the governor has already submitted his amendments to the budget, and then we had our hearings last week on the Senate side where any amendments that we're proposing to the budget were brought before one of the subcommittees of the Finance Committee. And the way that process works is that the governor presents a budget at the very start of the session, and then as we see how the revenues are flowing, he can submit amendments to the budget, and that's been done this past week. And then the individual members of the legislature can also have amendments that are supplemental to the budget. They present that to a committee. Those are vetted and reviewed by a committee and then passed on to the House and the Senate to actually be voted on. And I'll pass this on down to see if the other two have anything to add.
Yeah, basically, like Dr. Briggs said, is that the governor did his supplemental budget. Both House and senators can do budget appropriation amendments, and they each present them to their budget subcommittee, and that group kind of narrows down to, there's an X number of, dollars that basically the General Assembly has that they can budget, basically, is what it amounts to. And they narrow it down, and then those two budget subcommittees go together, and obviously I'm not on that, but I always think it's kind of like playing poker. Well, I'll give you this one if you give me this one, or they go in with what they feel like is the more important thing while they narrow down that process. It's helpful, and for the most part, it's best if you've got a House member and a senator that doing an appropriation, so it's coming from both directions. And the hard thing is if, well, there's two parts. One, it's easier to get non-recurring versus recurring because there's, never any guarantee that that money's going to be there next year. So the non-recurring things are simpler. The other thing that's usually taken into consideration is whether it's got some statewide applicability or if it is just a local project that doesn't have that applicability. And so usually those local ones are much harder to get. It's not impossible. That's why you present them. But people come to you and say, okay, will you help with this or will you sponsor this? And then you sometimes try to get other members to sign on to give it a little more support. But this is kind of the final process. The committees have been closing down, and I think the judiciary is still open in the Senate, and of course the Finance Committee. And so their work is starting. So actually our days are getting a little calmer. You missed it. We took the commissioners to lunch. So if we'd seen you, you could have gone with us. But that's amazing that we just said, oh, we can go to lunch. But because normally you're scheduled about every 15 minutes. So anyway, do you have anything?
Sure. I think for me, for those who don't know, I won a special election in August, and so this is my very first session. And so for me, this budget process has been fascinating. As Senator Massey talked about the jockeying that goes back and forth for money, statewide applications versus local applications. And then I actually had a bill that went before Finance this week that they put behind the budget. And so because of the fiscal note on it, I know Representative Smith had one. And so the first time I heard that term was about a week and a half ago, and I was told, hey, they might put yours behind the budget. And I said, well, is that a bad thing? And they said, well, it's not a good thing. Bills go there to sit, not necessarily to die, but they go to sit and they're on life support. And so the entire budgeting process has been very interesting to me because, again, there are so many budget amendments that are submitted, and I've submitted a couple myself, and Finance really has to go through those. And some people think, I've had people emailing me saying, please support this budget amendment, please vote for this one, and we don't actually vote on individual budget amendments. Finance does their job in whittling those down. And so it's just been interesting and fascinating and how complex the budget process is and how long it's been going on, and it's really a central part to what goes on during session.
It was my understanding there's only about 200 budget amendments this year, and sometimes there's 800. So a slim, lean year for amendments. Jason, I know you had talked about before the session wanting to add some additional money to TDOT for trying to figure out how we address the long-term issues of transportation and infrastructure funding. The governor did add some additional money to give back to TDOT in his supplemental. What's happening with that? I would be curious if there's been any discussion at all this year about a gas tax, a diesel tax, whatever, for long-term solutions.
Sure. And being on transportation sub and full, I've been involved in these conversations since session started, and that has been the concern. I know knocking on doors last summer before my election, the concern was, and I represent Farragut, I represent that southwest corner, and so you knock on doors and people would say it's not so much that I mind paying a gas tax, it's have we exhausted every option available to us, because everybody knows about the surplus. Over the last 13 months, we've had an $838 million surplus just in the last 13 months. And so when you talk about a surplus and you talk about the way some of the money was spent out of the last budget, the $120 million museum has a tendency to come up. People want to know it's not so much that we mind paying an extra 10 to 15 cents a gallon or paying a little bit more in a registration fee. We just want to make sure we've exhausted every option. And so the bill that I was actually just referencing that was put behind the budget, it was a bill that I was carrying that was very outside the box. It was very different, but we had had roughly 30 people sign on to that bill, went out of transportation sub and full, and then went to finance and got put behind the budget. But it basically allocated 25% of the surplus, or designated 25% of the surplus every month, as long as the surplus was at least $5 million. And at the end of that year, it would then move that money over into a priority TDOT fund that would allow TDOT to use that for our federal match, because there's some concern we may not have enough money to meet our federal match, which would require us to pull money from other projects. It would allow them to use that for backlog projects or for bridges and overpasses and roads. And I think one of the misconceptions, and we actually talked about this in transportation sub 2 weeks ago, TDOT has enough money for bridges, for roads, for critical projects. Paul with TDOT made it very, very clear. He said, we have funds for that. He said, it's this $6 billion, which is a wish list. I mean, make no mistake, it is a wish list of things that if we had all the money available to us, it would be great to be able to attack that $6 billion list. But those are not critical projects. Those are more capacity projects. And so, I know for us on transportation, we want to make sure that, and TDOT's been presenting to us for the last 7 weeks. Every week they would come and present, and then the very last, some of you probably heard this because I think the New Sentinel wrote about it, Jim Henry actually brought up the gas tax and said it's something they would probably push, and something, gas tax, battery tax, and some other things, and we still haven't seen a definitive plan yet. But I know for us as legislators, it's our job to protect you. It's our job to steward your tax dollars well. And when you've got a surplus, we've got to make sure we've exhausted every option and we utilize those dollars before we come to you and say we've got to raise taxes of any kind. Some of you probably know that the average price of gas just jumped over $2 in Tennessee. So it's much easier to talk about a gas tax when it's $1.79, but when it's $2, $2.50, $3, $3.25, and then we're talking about adding 10, 15, or 20 cents of gas tax, battery tax, and other things. For many, they're like, well, I'll just pay it. But for the majority of the state, that's a budget buster for many people. So it's our job to protect you. We're fighting to do that. Again, that bill that I have that's behind the budget, I'm really going to fight for that once the budget process is completed. But just know we're looking to steward and exhaust every option available to us, and it'll be interesting to see where this goes over the next couple of weeks going into next session.
What's the physical note on it?
Well, the fiscal note is $5 million, because if the surplus is $5 million or over, then my bill, this would kick in, and then it would start designating 25% of that surplus once it goes over $5 million. So it's only for surplus dollars, but it does have that note on it, which when finance sees that, everybody takes a deep breath and they say, put that behind the budget. We can't look at that right now. Eddie Smith, Representative Smith, he has a bill that would move the additional $130 million that was taken from the TDOT fund 10, 15 years ago. He has a bill that would move the additional 130 back into TDOT because 260 was taken out. His was moved behind the budget. So just know you're going to hear the talk of the gas tax. Nothing's going to happen this session, but come 2017, that talk will again be probably at the forefront, and we're doing everything we can to ensure that whatever happens is as limited as possible on our constituents.
All right, thank you, Jason. Last time we were here at our last legislative briefing, we talked a good bit about the University of Tennessee and the Office of Diversity. I think that's...
I'm glad I handed the microphone.
I'll take it.
I think, right, it may be settled in the House, but where is that on that diversity funding? Is that dead, or is it still alive in the Senate?
Well, I don't know about on the House because we have not seen that, but we did have a bill. We talked a little bit about this at our last meeting that deals with the University of Tennessee, and that's why I asked for the microphone, and I am going to speak on that because some of the code on the governance of the University of Tennessee had not been changed since the 1890s, and it was not clear who reports to who, how is the president hired, how are the chancellors hired. We have the directors of the 4 institutes. Who can fire those directors? Who sets their salaries? And Representative Harry Brooks from here in Knoxville, and he's from the east part of the county, and I had a bill this year, and it passed the Senate. I'm not sure, I believe it's passed the House also at this point, but I'm not certain, that outlines an organizational chart just like you see for a company. authority. We have very specifically what the roles are for the Board of Trustees, and then in particular, we're giving more power to the President. And to try to sum this up, it was a multi-page bill, but the President would make recommendations to the Board of Trustees about hiring the chancellors and the directors of the different institutes at the University of Tennessee. The President would have the authority to fire the chancellors, and the chancellors report to the President. The two officers at the University of Tennessee that cannot be fired by the President are the Chief Legal Officer and the Chief Financial Officer. And the reason we did that, if there's ever any question of fiscal malfeasance, we don't want him to be able to fire those until the investigations can be done, and we know that they can speak freely to the Board of Trustees. And what we're hoping, there's many more details to this, and because the Lady Vol issue came up, and the Board of Trustees did not have the opportunity or did not elect to have the citizens speak, and I think there was 20 or 28,000, I forget the number of signatures, is we just simply said in the bill is that the Board of Trustees has to have a mechanism to be able to listen to citizen issues that come up. We didn't specify what they were. But what we're hoping that by having a very clear, what I call the chain of command, and a very clear organizational chart, everyone knows who reports to who. And I think it would be fair to say that the President of the University of Tennessee can put a little plaque on his desk, a little sign on his desk that says the buck stops here.
Oh, it did pass the House. It did pass the House. Okay. Becky?
And I think what your question was on that, moving the diversity funding, I believe where that is, and it's not been, I'm not on education, so it hadn't been before me or Dr. Briggs, but I believe that is behind the budget, and I don't see that happening. I think Rick's bill is something that is going to kind of clear up and take care of some of the things that had been out there kind of floating around, and I think that's going to kind of take care of things.
All right. Anybody have any questions about that before we move on to another topic? Interrupt if you do, by the way. Representative Martin Daniel, good to see you here as well. Let's talk about wine and grocery stores. That has been in the news a lot lately. You're the wine guy, state and local, right?
Right.
Yeah. So talk about that. And as you all know, they passed a bill last year that would allow the sale of wine in groceries, but not really, not exactly. So there are a whole lot of caveats to that as opposed to what other states go through. But the question this session has been, can they actually start selling on July 1, or do they have to start stocking it on July 1 and then it's months? So where is that, and are we going to be able to go to Kroger and buy wine July 1?
Yeah, that's a good question. We had a very long and heated discussion, let me call it animated discussion on that on Wednesday at the State and Local Government Committee. And what the issue is that both the grocery stores and the wholesalers, these are the people that would bring the wine to be sold into the grocery stores, said that if the law says they can start selling on July the 1st, they said we can't supply every grocery store overnight on July the 1st. So there was a bill that was brought forward that said that they could start stocking the grocery stores 90 days ahead of time, and then it would be an even playing field, so all the stores would have the wine available to be sold on July the 1st. Another part of the bill that became even more controversial is that we had a large chain store, a national chain store, they call it the Walmart of liquor stores, that wanted to come into the state. And as the original part of the agreement and bill that passed a couple of years ago that was going to permit wine in grocery stores said that your local liquor store, which under the previous law said that there could only be one per family, they could have an unlimited number in the state. Well, sometimes you don't want to get what you ask for because it can come back back to bite you. And these local liquor stores that maybe wanted to open a couple in the community found out that a large chain, and like I said, it's like the Walmart for liquor stores, was wanting to come in, and they show these beautiful pictures of these huge stores that would have everything imaginable, and obviously they would cause some very stiff competition to the locally owned places. Well, so they came back, and when we had the bill to stock the wine in the grocery stores early, they said that it would be limited to 2 stores per owner or per family. And that became a little bit controversial. And then also there were some limits in the law that said that if there was a liquor store within 500 feet of a grocery store, there had to be an agreement signed with the liquor store and the grocery store, the big grocery store, I'm talking about Kroger's or Food City, something like that, that the local liquor store would agree for them to sell the wine. If not, they would have to wait a year. In exchange, the local liquor store is selling a lot of things that they couldn't have sold before. So that became very controversial over that also. But ultimately, the bill went ahead and passed. We did take away the 500-foot restriction, and that caused a lot of animated discussion on that. But the way it stands right now, assuming that it goes through, assuming that the governor signs it, is that the wholesalers will be able to stock the liquor stores 90 days prior to July the 1st. So, and we did away with the 500-foot law. So essentially all the grocery stores that want to do it will have wine available on July the 1st.
I was thinking about Trader Joe's, and there's a Bob's right across the street from them, so you have taken that out, that provision out, the 500 feet. Interesting. Yes?
Now that liquor by the drink is allowed in the county, we've had a level of interest raising with contacts, clients wanting to build package stores in the county. And has any discussion been made with that? Because it seems to be raising the interest in the community. Has there been any discussion with allowing or a vote for package stores in the county?
I have not heard that come up.
You county commissioners, y'all heard anything about that? Stay tuned, I guess. Yes, sir.
This thing you're speaking of, Rick, it's Wine and More from Maryland,
Yeah.
I think. Virginia. I was under the impression they were mainly wine and not liquor.
No, they do everything.
Would the bill, as you're passing it, prohibit them from having several different corporations, maybe do 2 stores each, or you ever see that expanding? Because to me, I'm not so sure that's a bad thing. It's probably bad for maybe the local liquor stores and so forth, but it's kind of, you're calling them like Walmart, and I'm not so sure for the consumer it's all that bad to have a Walmart type thing. But what is it? There was something about the wholesale price versus because we sold in the supermarket versus the liquor stores.
20%.
Yeah, I was going to say what you're referring to is that, because the grocery stores obviously can buy at a volume, I mean, maybe even, at the state level or national level at a volume that the locally owned liquor store couldn't, that they would undersell them. And so there were restrictions at 20%. They can't discount discount more than that.
That's still in the bill.
That's still in the bill.
No $2 Chuck wine and Trader Joe's. It's,
So the wholesale price might be?
well, it could be $1. It could be. It actually could be. Anybody else have questions?
Is that big store being allowed to come in? The big stores not being allowed
They can put
to
The big store, they can bring 2 into the state,
As the bill
the way it
currently
is
stands.
right now.
Yeah, bill currently stands. See, we have more interest in the wine and grocery stores than you do.
One one thing that played into that, but that plays into a lot of things, when you've got a controversial subject that you've got differing opinions on different sides, often the best way to get to solutions is to bring all the parties together and sit down and say, okay, what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to keep from achieving? And basically mediate the bill before it ever gets to committee, before it passes through committee, and obviously, and that's where the heavy lifting is done before, and then, that takes place before it ever gets to the floor. That's what happened with the wine and grocery stores bill. It had been going on for a long time before we ever got there, and so they finally sat down and they came to an agreement, and I'm kind of the philosophy that, if there is an agreement between the parties, the people that are looking for it, there's a certain amount that you ought to honor the process. And I know Jerry and some of the hospital folks here, John, we've had a CON bill here that's recently, and they finally sat down and came to negotiations here this past week. So there's a part of the process that I think it is important to respect, because you don't really want all-out fights, because, usually if you try to bulldoze something through without that compromise process and that mediation process, you're not going to ultimately end up with a good piece of legislation. There's going to be unintended consequences and things like that. And they say when you mediate, and I've had a good time mediating some bills, but they say that if you come out and both sides don't think it's perfect, then you've really probably got to a more of a winning and a better piece of legislation. I guess my biggest one I've kind of worked toward is looking at the practice authority of advanced practice nurses, and I've worked with the doctor community and the nurse community for about a year and a half now, and we got from out to about here. We just can't pass this last divide, and so we actually this year I passed a task force that is going to take it away from the lobbyists and get it to the folks that that really are doing it day in and day out, and on both sides, and we're going to work on it and try to we may not get totally touching, but at least get closer to get something that both sides will agree on passing next year. So that's kind of how some of these kind of issues happen, and why I think it is important basically to respect the process.
Jason, you might want to address this, but one of the things that's been in the news a lot lately in the last couple of weeks is the attempt to make the Bible our official book in Tennessee, and I thought it was dead, but then it seems to have been resurrected, pun intended. So where is that, and why? Who's pushing? Are you for it?
Yeah, and it's already passed the House, so it won't come back to the House. So it's actually in the Senate. It was brought back up, and I'll let Becky.
Okay, perfect.
Basically, it passed in the House last year. The Senate actually sent it back to committee, so that meant it didn't die. It just wasn't voted on last year. Now, all bills have a 2-year run for that General Assembly. So, unless something is defeated, which in the Senate that means it's got to get 17 votes against it. It's got to get at least 5 votes in a committee other than Finance, because it's a little larger. But if it's not defeated, then it can be brought back. So basically, it has been. It went back to committee. It passed out of committee this past week. So we'll probably see it here in this next week, maybe on the Senate floor. It is not. It is the version that Senator Sutherland has is looking at the Bible as the historic document, not the religious document, and it's based on that. Our country was founded on the principles of the Bible. It doesn't recognize one religion over the other. It recognizes that as part of the founding documents of our country. So that is the basis of it, and I'd say we'll see it this week.
Interesting. And it has been constitutionally suspect in the past, but you're saying because they made it as the historic book of Tennessee that it has a possibility of being acceptable from the Constitution?
Possibly. I'm not a lawyer. I purposely was not a lawyer. I had lots in my family, but I'm not.
More to come on that. Senator Briggs, last time you were here, you talked about a bill that you had worked on to curb some of the opiate epidemics. Did that go anywhere?
Yeah, I'm going to back up because I'd much rather talk about this than the Bartlett M84 machine gun that's also now the official gun of Tennessee. But anyway, when you step back and you look at what the big problems are in our community and also what's important to the business community, we're going to see, everyone agrees that the whole basis for developing business and to improve the economic health of our community really is education. I mean, we can talk about other things, but it's education. Then the next thing, from the business point of view, we need to do is to have the economic environment where businesses will want to come here and bring good paying jobs. And we have to have the workforce, which gets back to education for those jobs. But to me, then, the third leg is that we have to have a healthy population for people to work there. Right now, in Tennessee, and it's worse in Tennessee than in any other state, is that we have an opiate problem, a problem of people who are addicted. I've had business people that are in Upper Tennessee have told me they no longer drug test because if they drug tested and made that a condition for employment, they couldn't find anybody to work for them. And this used to be a problem that we had just, not to, cast any issues on anything. It used to be just an inner city problem or just a very subpopulation was involved in this. It's everywhere now. We've had a very famous radio announcer, and I'll mention him by name, Rush Limbaugh, who has a felony conviction. We have judges right here in Knox County where it's been a problem, and I can tell you we've had doctors and lawyers and business people that have had problems with this addiction. This is a problem that relates to business. And it's a man-made epidemic, and it can take man-made solutions to fix it. We've had several bills that we've had in the last 2 years, and I have to say, after Insure Tennessee, which didn't work out too well, but we'll come back to that maybe next year. But, my focus this past year really has been trying to deal with that opiate addiction. And we've had several bills, and I want to say that Becky Massey being on the health committee has been a big part of the solution, and I mean some of the leaders in the state have also been Bill Dunn and Randy McNally, who's going to be our next lieutenant governor, by the way. But some of the things that we've done is last year we passed a bill that said that by July the 1st of 2016, that's just a couple of months from now, if it's not a hospital-owned pain clinic, it has to be partially owned by a Tennessee licensed physician. Another very important part that may close a third to a half of all the pain clinics in the state is that the medical director has to be board certified in pain medicine. We saw a flurry of these organizations. You send in $5,000 and you get a certificate for life's experiences. So I had a bill this year that said the 3 specialties that would be recognized by the state, and these require very rigorous training, very rigorous board certification. They are real pain specialists. That passed. It caused a huge stir. This is even at the very basic level, this is a multi-million-dollar business. And we had some, very powerful and wealthy people that were opposing us on this. Another huge bill that we passed this year deals with the Department of Health going into the pain clinics and inspecting and licensing those clinics. And if they find that they're deviating from the guidelines that have been set down, they can put a monitor in that clinic that has to be paid for by the pain clinic to keep track of that. You can no longer make it a cash-only business. On the other end, which what I call the Suboxone or the rehabilitation clinics, and that drug can also be diverted just like the opiates can. We're going to license them. And we're also going to have inspections, no longer a cash business. We're going to separate the pain clinics from the Suboxone clinics, where you can't do both. This is running your heater and your air conditioner at the same time. These are at opposite ends. And I think part of the advantage of having, I'm going to put a plug in for having physicians in the state legislature, we needed to do some education that there's a difference between the opiates, the Percocets, the hydrocodones, the Oxycontins, and the Suboxone, which is really a detoxification rehabilitation drug. They both can be diverted. That's the one common element. But I really believe that after we do this, we're using we have several years ago, we passed a law where all the physicians and the pharmacies and the patients, their prescriptions are recorded, and we have the top 50 list, and the health department's going in and looking at those people now too. So I think that these things we're doing, I met with the health department yesterday, and I said, I think we need to do a pause because this is really aggressive, and we're going after it and see how this works. We want to be sure that we don't know. One of the potential unintended consequences could be where we have a bunch of addicts out there that have nowhere to go, and they're going to have to be treated. I've also talked with the local health department and with the Department of Health of coming up with a contingency plan. What are we going to do if we have all these addicts that are showing up in the emergency rooms or whatever? We need to have a plan for that because we don't want them to turn to heroin. But anyway, that's some of the things that we've done, and I'll pass, if we have any questions, or I'll pass this down to...
Jerry, you had...
Well, if you want to say something, say it.
Well, I just said it is going to move some folks nationally. They're saying it is moving folks to heroin, and they've said that we're going to see that in Tennessee. I heard while I was driving home through all the traffic yesterday, in the wreck, it took me 4.5 hours to get home, I think. But anyway, that there was, I forget what city it was in, but they did the overdose drug to this there's one folk, the naloxone, and that's why I've got the technical people here, but they had one fella that he overdosed 3 times in one day. And so what they've decided to do there was only give them enough to keep them from dying, but not to totally wake up so they won't at least overdose multiple times in one day. So that's another thing. But it's just the health thing is but what we've done on the pill problem, the pill mill problem and everything is that basically it's been putting more tools in the tool belt each year. My first day down there in January of 12, I had a young lady call me up, and her brother had OD'd the week before, and she had called me up, and we started working on bills that year, and each year it's just a little bit more, and it's like, we're given this time to work, what do we need to do next, but without causing major problems. It may be some inconveniences, but major problems to the folks that are doing things right. So it's kind of that fine balance.
I just want to give you an idea about how serious this problem is. Last year, we had around 930 people that died in traffic accidents in Tennessee. We had 1,300 people that died of accidental drug overdoses. I mean, this is huge. We had, if you go back just a few years, we had essentially maybe a handful of babies a year that were born addicted from the mothers. Knoxville is the world's epicenter for the neonatal abstinence syndrome. We have people coming from all over the world that come here to the University of Tennessee and particularly Children's Hospital. And it's an Appalachia and East Tennessee problem in particular. You look at, I think if you look at Crossville and to the east, we had about 600 babies that were born. Memphis had 30. Nashville had about 50. So this is really an East Tennessee problem that we're dealing with. I mean, it's a problem everywhere. You look at the number of pain clinics. Does Knoxville need 34 pain clinics? That's why this is so, the law enforcement people, I didn't see, sometimes I know we see law enforcement people that are here, but I asked them how much of a problem is this opiate addiction problem. They said they thought that 90% of the crime could be traced back to that in one form or another. I mean, this problem is huge, and it's come upon us so fast, I think that some of us don't realize it, but if we really go back to look at our neighbors' children, or someone we know, we probably know somebody, all of us know somebody that this has touched. This is not just a subpopulation of the inner city that's affected. It's everywhere, and it affects our business, and it affects our lives.
That's pretty staggering statistics. Jerry, you had a question?
Yeah, I appreciate your framing this as a business issue, because it's a huge business issue, and that leads me into a larger thought process. Mental health in general is a business issue because of the health of the community and the cost and all that. Is the legislature engaged in any way in the discussions about the aftermath of the closing of Lakeshore? We have, it was supposed to be, all of those people were supposed to be handled with community resources, and I can tell you we've got them stacked in our emergency rooms because there's nowhere else to send them, and they can stay in our emergency room for days waiting for a placement somewhere. It's just, from our perspective, it's just been a failure in terms of having a place to send people who are mentally ill, which includes often the drug addiction. So I know that the commissioner's engaged. Is the legislature engaged in trying to address that issue?
We are. Last year, there was $10 million that was cut from the budget, and that was going to have a huge impact here locally, because part of the promise that was made, and Commissioner Dave Wright is here when we listened to Commissioner Varney of the Department of Mental Health came and promised that we would have resources to hire case managers at Helen Ross McNabb, for instance. Well, that money was cut completely, and to me that was a broken promise. And I'm going to do a shout out right now to Becky, because Becky and I both fought, but Becky's is in a way in this business, and she could help me with it. We got that $10 million put back because there was then an additional $20 million, so it was a total of $30 million for the state that came back, so Helen Ross McNabb could continue to have those case managers. And looking at my county commissioners over there, this really affected the county also, because those people, rather than being managed as outpatients, were ending up in the county jail. And our county sheriff, J.J. Jones, will tell you that 20 to 25% of the people out there in the jail, he runs the largest mental health institute in East Tennessee, mental health hospital. And they're talking about now doing the safety center. To answer your question, a lot of this is going to be done. President Obama this week is trying to address this whole opiate addiction problem. He's going to be putting a lot of money into this. I think it's going to start filtering down at the state level. We just don't know how yet. Let me pass this to Becky.
And, there is lots of conversations about mental health. I mean, because opioid addictions is part of mental health issues. I know the idea is that people get better services in community-based services as opposed to long-term care. And so, when you have community institution type things, there's a lot more, it costs a lot more, and you can't touch as many people. And so I'm sure there was still people ending up in the emergency room that even when Lakeshore was there because of mental health issues. But it is something that, the safety center, if we can get that eventually here in Knox County, we're continually talking about. There is some budget amendments for some treatment facilities, both for, people with mental illness, people that are pregnant, that are addicted. We'll see what do those get funded? I do specifically ask the commissioner every year when they're in health committee talking about their budget is, has that money stayed in East Tennessee? Because it wasn't just supposed to stay in Knoxville, but East Tennessee. And, you know, how many people is it touching each year? So, you know, because they made the promise that those dollars that were spent at Lakeshore would be used for mental health treatment. And so that is something we will continue to ask. You know, I don't worry as much about those dollars being used now, but when the administration changes, they might forget that promise, and we will make them remember it and continue to work on it. But it is a tough issue. I mean, it's, you know, nationally, I mean, it's just, I think when we moved to, you know, the decade where we started hearing every commercial, if you feel bad, here is this pill that will make you better. And if you want this shiny boat, you should have it. Here's the credit card to help you get it. I mean, it was that instant gratification that I think now we're seeing all the problems that have happened in our culture from that, and it's a shame. But you and I've had many conversations about the problems in your emergency room. So,
Ed Chess?
De-annexation.
The annexation?
Oh, boy.
It's dead, right?
That's a very good question. We had, at least from what I saw, it was the most animated debate. I mean, passions were high within the legislature. The passions were high with the people that were there last week when we discussed de-annexation. For any of you that may not be aware, is what the de-annexation bill that came up in the debate that followed it this year dealt with communities, and these were neighborhoods that had been annexed since 1998. There was a bill this year that said those neighborhoods, if they signed a petition, could have it put as a referendum issue back on the ballot as to whether to de-annex. A lot of issues came up with this, particularly with the large municipalities, and quite frankly, I think the biggest issue was going to be Memphis, because just in the last couple of years, they had some annexations where these very upscale, gated neighborhoods that provided their own security, that provided their own roads, they were having trouble balancing the budget, and they went in, they woke up one morning and said, you've been annexed, and here's your tax bill, and we want our money now. And then they would say, well, who's going to be our elected representative on the city council? You're going to have to wait 2 years to vote. You have no voice for 2 years. They were very upset. And this is a basic principle of, should the government be able to come in without the consent of the governed, be able to annex their neighborhoods, assess them taxes, and at least for a period of time, they have no representation and no recourse. That's what it's all about. Now, there's a lot of other issues. Is what about the older neighborhoods where they've come in and put in sidewalks, they paved roads, they put in sewers, they put in city water. And there were 25 amendments. I thought we spent days on this in the last couple of weeks, days on this. And what was finally put on there is if a bond was issued to put in roads or sewers and the bond had only been partially paid off, that would go back if the neighborhood de-annexed. We also, as an amendment, put on there, we made it a little bit more difficult. We said they were going to have to get 20% of the registered voters on the petition to put it on the ballot as a referendum issue. Then there were several other smaller issues. It came before the Senate State and Local Government Committee on Wednesday. The passions were high, very high with this, and we voted to send it to summer study. Now, I'll tell you how I voted and why, because I was in favor. I didn't think we could get through 25 amendments, but we did the day before in a meeting dedicated just to that. So I thought there was nothing else to discuss, and we needed to vote on it. And I had told Mayor O'Hara here in town and Mayor Strickland in Memphis that I was going to vote to pass this de-annexation bill to let the people to do it. But we did add the additional amendments on there that was not going to make it easy, and there would be a financial burden that they would have to pick up if they wanted to de-annex. But when we voted on it, one of the disadvantages of having your name start with a B, I have to vote first on everything. So I have no idea what the others are going to do. But as they say, I voted my conscience and I voted pass. So because I could see, I could see both sides of the argument, but I still felt as a basic democratic principle that you should not be annexed without your consent, and if you were annexed involuntarily since 1998, I thought that was, quite frankly, a little long. I wish we could have maybe done it to 10 years. But if you had been annexed recently, then you should have the right to finally vote to say, I didn't want this to happen.
So the bill died?
Well, yes and no. Every bill that doesn't pass this year is dead this year. But the Senate does, in the House, their summer studies are just, that does kill it. In the Senate, we actually will do we'll do meetings and give it a little bit more time in more depth. Now, we did pass last year that there can't be forced annexation. So that was the first part of it, where people, if an area wants to be annexed, they have to be able to vote on it. So we did. This was the second leg of the stool, and so, but I'm sure we will see it back next year in some form or fashion.
Yes, sir.
Rumor is that we're going to have a permanent small reduction in the hall tax, but what are there's a plethora of bills that were introduced about that, I think, in both the House and the Senate. So what's going on with that?
Well, those bills, just like Jason's bill, goes behind the budget. If there's a physical note, and in the Senate, they go behind the budget if they're over our sweeper, which is $50,000, and in the House it goes if it's $1,000 behind the budget. But they're behind the budget, so that it's now up to the Finance Committee to determine if there is money for it. And it's like Senator Briggs said here at the beginning, there's, when you've got extra money, it's tough because you've got the mental health issue that needs money, you've got the transportation that needs money, you've got the hall tax that needs money. It is, there's a lot of competing demands, and I'm sure if I mention each of those, you've got the East Tennessee Historical Center that needs money. So everybody raised their hand on all these different things and different things that they're close to their heart, and it's tough trying to sit down and see what works best. But they did just come out with a report this week that Tennessee has the fourth lowest tax burden, taking all that into consideration in the country. So we're still a great managed state. That doesn't mean we all agree with everything that happens. I tell people I don't even agree with myself all the time. So, and obviously Briggs didn't when he was voting on that bill, but it's still, it's a good place to be. I mean, I'd much rather have our balanced budget, even if I don't get everything in there that I think needs to be in there, than to live somewhere where there's a huge tax burden and they're in debt and, their water is no good. I mean, so we've got a great place to be. We've got a great General Assembly. A lot of good things are happening. We're doing things that save lives, and the important things. You hear a lot of stuff about the rifle or the Bible or some of the other things, but really there's a lot of good work there, a lot of great people that we serve with down in Nashville that are spending time away from their families, and I'm proud to serve with the folks I serve with in Nashville. They're great folks, but the Knox County delegation is the very best. So,
Jason, this was your first session.
Yes.
What surprised you in a good way, and what has surprised you in not so good a way?
I think, and that's a good question, because I'm asked that all the time. What's been the biggest surprise? And I think the biggest surprise has been, as Becky just alluded to, the heart of the people to serve. The people that represent you guys are incredible. I mean, this is Tim Burchett said this to me right after I got elected. He said it's the purest form of service, because he said this is a 40 to 60 hour a job week, a 40 to 60 hour job week. And so it does. It takes time for our family. I own a business, so it takes time from that business, but it's worth it. And so you look at the people that are there. Martin's a business owner. I'm a business owner. Becky runs Sertoma. Dr. Briggs. I mean, there's a...
He saves lives.
He saves lives. Yeah, he does the most important thing. It's a big sacrifice, but it's amazing that the purity of the heart, and I truly say that in all sincerity, the purity of the heart of the people that are there to serve. I'm sure there's some people that are there for whatever reasons, but that has been my biggest surprise. That's been the biggest surprise, is the heart of the people, and especially our delegation here in Knox County. Being there for the 3 months I have been, there's not any other delegation in the state that works together like ours does. And we are blessed here in East Tennessee to have the delegation that we have and have the people that we have representing us, because they truly have your interest in heart. Whether it's the Halls tax, Ed, whether it's de-annexation, I think the important thing to remember is that we're accountable to you. It's not, I've had people ask me, I think I was even asked on your show, what's your agenda? I don't have an agenda. I can truly say I don't have an agenda. That was Boss, that was not you, yeah. I don't have an agenda. My agenda is your agenda. I am elected to represent you and be your voice. And so again, whether it's Halls tax, whether it's de-annexation, your voice is extremely important. The emails, the phone calls, the emails and phone calls to the governor, those need to be made on a consistent basis. If you have an issue you're passionate about, email and call. Because I know for me personally, I won't speak for anybody else, there's many things that come, hundreds and hundreds of bills that we have to go through on our committees, plus the bills that come to the House floor. And when you step back and look at a bill, there are many bills I'm 50-50 on. I could vote yes, I could vote no, I can see the merits of both sides. But an engagement by a constituent that'll email me, and I'll get 4 or 5 that'll maybe email on a bill and say, please oppose this, that makes it easy. Because if I'm...
Say you're from Knox County, though. We don't need your address.
Absolutely.
Tell to know that you're from Knox.
Yeah, always put your address, and a phone call is always great with a voicemail, because we get hundreds and hundreds of emails during a day. But make sure your voice is heard, because it's important. I know from all of us, because I see the responses, we all reply to our emails, and again, sometimes we'll get 300 to 500 in a day. But always email and call and make sure your voice is heard, because it does make a difference. And I've got one bill in particular that I was 50-50 on. I had a constituent call me, and he was a small business owner in Farragut, and he said, I'm asking you to oppose this bill. And so I opposed it, because 100% of my constituents that contacted me said oppose this bill. So you never know on a bill, depending on how I view the bill, and your one call could make the difference on that bill. So just know your voice is that important.
You shouldn't have told this group that.
I've heard from many people in this group.
Thank you all so much.